All right, so I've been wanting to make this video for a little bit. Now, this is going to be more of a sit-down conversation video where we're talking about the Sony FX3 for real estate videography. I may splash up some of the work and videos we've done with this camera, but for the most part, I just want this to be an open conversation. There's been some crazy Instagram videos talking about why this is an overrated camera when it comes to real estate. I think that ultimately these are really bad takes. And these are just people that have never gotten a chance to use this camera or don't really understand how to leverage it for themselves. So in this video, I want to talk about my top 3 reasons, plus one of the reasons why I'm going to hang on to this camera, because in 2024 September, this is going to be getting an update that is going to make it far more powerful than it is right now. Let's get started. What's good, everybody? Ken here. You're watching OriginaldoBo, and the Sony FX3 has been my video camera of choice when it comes to real estate for the past 3 years. For a brief moment, I ended up purchasing a Ronin 4D, and in turn, I ended up trading this out for a Sony a7S III, but I've had the Sony A1, the a7S III, the Ronin 4D, and yet here I am coming right back to the FX3. So I figure we'll go over those top 3 reasons. But really quickly, I'll just make a shameless plug here. If you do want to check out some of the work that we do here in the Tampa area, check out the link in the description below for Apex Imaging Media, our Instagram. You don't have to follow, but if you're just looking for some inspiration or see what we do to back up the things that I'm talking about, it's in the description below. But let's start off in no particular order with the Builtin Fan. So being here in Florida, it is a hotter than normal climate here. And I have had plenty of Sony cameras overheat on me in the dead of summer, especially when I'm working with a client that typically will take multiple takes, or we're constantly sort of running and gunning and I'm leaving that camera on. Filming in 4K 120, I have had the Sony a7S III overheat on me. Filming in 4K 120, 4K 60, 4K 30 with the A1, I've had the camera overheat on me much faster than any other camera. But that's to be expected since that camera gets hotter than almost any other Sony camera that I've had. Hence the reason why I ended up selling that camera. It just had too many problems and the bad outweighed the good, in my honest opinion, when it came to real estate. But with the Sony FX3, because it does have active cooling, I've never had an issue whether it be in 4K 120, 4K 60, 4K 30. I've filmed weddings with this where I've had long ceremonies of over 30 minutes long. And the only thing I've ever had to worry about was the battery life. And thus far, I have never been able to make this camera overheat here in Florida, even over 100 degrees, which is one of the reasons why I cannot recommend this camera enough. Reason number 2 is Cine EI and Quick Cine modes. So when it comes to exposure, you have 2 base ISOs on this camera. You have ISO 800, which is your low base ISO, and then you have your extended base ISO, which is 12,800 ISO, which is really fantastic in those situations where you are limited on life. Hashtag Team F22, if you know, you know. But essentially, I try to stay within my base ISOs to control the noise that this camera can produce. Because it has such large pixels, you can get much larger noise than you get on the A1 because it's just a denser pixel density on the sensor, or the A7 IV in perception. It looks like it's a cleaner image in some of these different ISOs like ISO 3200 or even ISO 2500. And because of that, I always try to keep my FX3 at 800 or 12,800 to preserve dynamic range and the overall usability of the image. And Quick Cine EI and Cine EI allows me to quickly toggle between those base ISOs and make sure that I'm always filming at one of those ISOs. It also allows me to embed LUTs if I want to embed a LUT directly to the video footage, or it allows me to preview directly from the monitor, which they have LUT previews on the a7S III, but they don't do the same thing that they do here on the FX3, where you can just embed LUTs directly to it, and you can even bake it directly in if you wanted to save your time. I don't recommend doing that, but it's something you could do if you wanted to do. But again, I just love having Cine EI. I think it just works incredibly well. And it makes exposing and making sure my shots are always exposed accurately and helps me reduce some of that post reduction of noise and just speeds up my workflow overall. All right, let's talk about the customizable nature of this camera along with the modularity of the FX3. So the FX3 has mounting points all around the body. It has quarter 20 points everywhere, which is really fantastic if you are somebody that likes to rig out this camera or if you want to mount it in precarious situations. I have done several shots where I'm trying to film a realtor driving in the car, and I have this mounted up in the corner with the cage off of it so it doesn't smash up against their windshield. And I have a sort of a suction cup on the glass, but I have a quarter 20 into the camera itself, and I have the camera wedged up as far as it can go into the corner. And this works really, really well. I've also had this where we've mounted this on a car on an arm, so that way we can drive, on a vehicle, and then have this to where essentially it's more of an adaptation arm. It's hard to explain. It's a very dangerous apparatus, but it's worked in several situations, and I didn't have to have a cage on the camera. Also, if you are rigging this out and you are putting this into a cage, you'll be happy to know your cage is going to fit really solid because, as you can see, the screws are going to go into those quarter 20 mounting points, keeping the cage from shifting all around and causing damage to your camera. It just makes for a much more solid feel. In the form of customizable nature, there are plenty of customizable buttons on this camera, more than what's on the Sony a7S III. Along with that, I've memorized where my white balance button is, my ISO, my iris button. I even have this front-facing button here set up so I can lock my white balance on the fly while I'm working. But a lot of times I do film auto white balance and then I will lock it in place. Once I see something that I like or I see the white balance that matches the best, I will go ahead and lock it in place. So it's nice having all these customizable buttons where you can just sort of effortlessly toggle in between all of your different settings. Just on the fly, it makes life very, very easy. All right, so let's get into the bonus round, which is something that is not here yet, but coming in September will be a new firmware update that is going to make this camera more of a cinema-worthy camera. We are going to be getting angle mode. And if you don't know what angle mode is, essentially this will always allow us to be at that 180 degrees of whatever our shutter speed is. So if I'm filming at 4K 60, in theory, my shutter should be set at 1/120th. But currently, if you go through the Sony menus, it will only go to 1/125th, which sometimes can cause problems. Just that little bit extra in the shutter can cause flicker and microwave times or digital or analog clocks. And when you're filming a really super high-end, expensive house, you want to be sure that you don't have any of those flickers. So the ability to adjust and dial in your shutter speed to exactly that 120th is going to be super, super clutch. Very, very handy. I'm so excited to have that. And it's something that it just goes to show you Sony is creating a camera system that is much more future forward. And the FX3 will always probably get updates far in advance beyond what the Sony a7S III. So if that is an additional reason to consider the FX3, it's going to be because of future firmware updates. Now, let's go over some reasons why you may not want to consider the Sony FX3. And really, in my opinion, it's a $400 difference between the FX3 and the a7S III. And the only logical reason would be is if you needed that electronic viewfinder. If you need an electronic viewfinder, then the Sony a7S III is going to be the much better camera for you. And if you're going to be doing photos with the camera, it's a lot easier to do photos on the a7S III than it is on the FX3. Not that the FX3 couldn't take photos if you needed to in a pinch, it's just much easier on the a7S III than it is on the FX3. But that would be the only reason. And I'm sorry, but getting dust spots on a sensor, I've never used an EVF to check my sensor. I've always cleaned my sensors down prior to swapping lenses. And if I am swapping lenses, I am spraying my lens down with a blower, making sure that I am cleaning it as I'm changing. These are just things that good filmmakers are going to do when lens swapping. You should always be checking your lens and always be blowing it off with dust, not necessarily relying on, oh, get your lens on, get everything rigged up, and then look through an EVF. I'm sorry, cinema cameras do not have EVFs. And some of the best cinematographers in the world are just checking and taking precautionary measures to make sure that their sensors stay clean in between lens swaps. It's just not enough of a reason. But for $400 more for the FX3, it has so much more of desirable features than the A7S III or other Sony cameras, with the exception of the FX6, which I never bought an FX6, even though it had built-in ND filters, only because of the usability. I wanted a cinema camera, but I also liked the idea of it being simple to use, like a mirrorless camera. And I feel like that's where the FX30 and the FX3 really win in that department, is just the overall usability, more like a mirrorless camera, not so much like a cinema camera. But there you go. Those are my reasons why I chose this for real estate media. I don't feel like it's overkill. I feel like it's a very well-rounded camera that's going to last you a long time. Like I said, I would have had the original FX3 that I had still to this day, and I still would have been using it, and it would have been perfectly perfect for all scenarios that I'm using it for. All right, that's going to do it for this video. If you have any value, if you've taken away, drop me a comment down below. Let me know what camera you've chosen to go with for your real estate media. As always, stay original.
I heard they checking for me, no one checking on me, so I had to go run up a check. I got the message on me, you know, flexing on me. My attorney gon' call and collect. Blessings on blessings for me, my successes only made them envious, they got upset. I had to put all their egos in.